Plato. After the death of Socrates, the torch was passed on to one of his students who also wrote his teacher's philosophical ideas down. Plato, who lived between 427 and 347 BCE, having witnessed his teacher executed by the democratic mobs, was an idealist, arguing that we all have a perfect idea of something, but in reality this does not exist. It only exists in our mind as a perfect form of that thing. There are chairs we see inside a room, but those are just models of a perfect chair that only exists in our mind. In other words, the chairs that humans make are modeled on a perfect chair inside the human mind. We see a mere shadow of what reality is on the outside. His famous thought experiment, Allegory of the Cave, illustrates that if you face away from the light source and see your own shadow inside a cave, that's how we perceive reality. Not what it is, but its shadow through our senses. So for Plato, humans can pre-assemble with all knowledge. In other words, we don't learn through our experiences or senses, but it's all inside. It only comes out when we experience it. Quote, what we call learning is only a process of recollection. This makes Plato's philosophy somewhat counterintuitive. We think what's on the outside is the real thing, and what we have on the inside in our mind is a mere representation of that real object. Plato thinks the opposite. What we see on the outside is the shadow of what's in our mind. We have an innate knowledge of the world from birth, and what we learn is just remembering or recalling those things that are already stored inside us. This is very similar to how the rationalists saw knowledge, which I'll discuss later on. Plato's idea of knowledge coming from inside us can also be interpreted in terms of the subconscious, or Jungian collective subconscious, deeply embedded in us from our evolutionary past. For instance, the fear of a snake in us is not because we experience snake bites in our own life, but because our ancestors experienced it in savanna, in the trees, or jungle, or in the cave. Despite us living in beautiful, safe houses, we still have the inner experience of being in the dark cave. Another example is horror movies. Our desire to see horror movies is simply because we still want to experience the fear from time to time, because that fear is inside us, and horror movies simply stimulate that fear. Sigmund Freud's dream interpretation is another way to understand Plato. In other words, dreams are our little window into the subconscious world inside us. Fiction writers, artists, musicians often experience a trance-like state when they are immersed in their art, tapping into their subconscious to bring out an art that is appreciated by many people simply because they reach a deeper well inside to drink from the collective subconscious knowledge. Despite being the artistic uncle, Plato also had strong opinions about politics. Plato was a republican and saw democracy akin to a mob rule as it killed his teacher Socrates. So he argued that philosophers were better suited to rule society as a republic. Just like Nietzsche, he had a low opinion of general public as unsuitable to rule a society, while philosophers were better equipped to rule a society. So he set up his academy where he wanted to cultivate the best minds of a generation, the elites of society. Today's university is very much modeled on Plato's academy where the intellectuals lock horns to discuss ideas. And one of those people was Aristotle, who graduated from his academy. Plato is called the idealist philosopher. However, his student Aristotle went a different route towards practical knowledge. So to sum up, Plato's teacher, Mr. Socrates, questioned things to find the truth. Plato said truth or perfection only exists in the soul, in the mind, or in the world of ideas or forms, and only their shadows are perceived through our senses. So Socrates gave philosophy a method of finding the truth, while Plato offered a perfectionist vision of the truth inside the mind. Now these two come together in Aristotle to provide a basis for modern Western philosophy, a progressive, perfectionist vision of truth-seeking, a single truth.